cows are about 5% of global emissions, which is pretty unbelievable.
Wild.
And if your goal is to get to zero, you don't get to skip the cows or the steel or the cement or, any of those big areas. So there's a whole class of solutions of making meat without cows. Today, it doesn't taste as good and it costs too much. It's going through a little bit of a lull, but those companies, Impossible Beyond, Memphis, and others are pursuing that. In terms of the cows, we pursued many solutions. So one is to vaccinate the cows in a way that their gut bacteria that emit the methane, which is also called natural gas or CH4, which is the second most important greenhouse gas, you can vaccinate them and that species of bacteria isn't there. Their stomachs are very special because they can eat grass. It's a 3-stage fermentation process, basically. There's another way you can change what they eat, and you could either put that in their water or their feed. There is a drug to change the microbiome, not a vaccine, but a drug. That looks very promising. And then there's a solution where you stick a sort of a metal thing into the skin of the cow, and it actually burns the methane. And all of these look to be quite cheap and implementable even in Africa. And so this is one where I wasn't hopeful when I got started a decade ago. And now it's just a question of which solution for which country ends up being the best.
Yeah, it's similarly amazing to like what you did with the toilet and all the rest. It's like, doesn't look like it's possible. Now it is, and it makes a huge difference. One of the other funny things when we were talking about the discovery of the work around cows over the dinner table is once you focus on it, it's not just the systemic climate change, but it's also the questions about, like, for example, what this can do for quality of life in Africa, right? So say a little bit more about like milk production and cow breeds and other things, because it's like, I never thought Bill as the cow expert, but here we are.
Well, I didn't grow up knowing much about cows. So protein is a very important part of a good diet, and foods with proteins tend to be very expensive. So if you can make chickens and cows live longer and be more productive, then that's super beneficial. So the West has taken these cows, these Holsteins, and driven them up so they make 30 liters of milk a day, whereas the normal cows make less than 3 liters a day. So you have this factor of 10 productivity through the genetics of that cow. Now, you can't just fly a Holstein down to Africa because the heat and the diseases, it's not adapted. But if you do the crossbreeding properly, only giving up a little bit of the productivity, say down to 20 liters, still a factor of 6 better, you can improve those cows. You also take the idea of grazing, where the cows are going out into areas that are now being fenced off, and you can change it so the cow's largely stationary and the food, which they call fodder, is brought to the cow. And so you avoid these incredible conflicts between the grazers and the other farmers. And so it's one of the most exciting foundation things. And once we do the R&D and get those good cows in, it's private market sustainable. We're further along with chickens. So I was in Ethiopia a few weeks ago, seeing that we've cut the price of chickens in half. Women who do this, they make extra money. They give some of the extra eggs to their kids as well as selling them. So it's but it's leveraged off of the West, that spent the last 100 years doing selective breeding of both chickens and cows.
So obviously, when we're thinking about chickens and cows, it's climate change, it's malnutrition, it's potentially war and conflict. If we zoom out on climate change, what is the sort of statistic that for you sort of represents the gravity of the situation, or what are you working towards to decrease when you think about, climate in general? Well, the size of the emissions, which is over 50 billion tons CO2 equivalent per year, and the pie chart of, what are the big 5 areas, like transport is one of the big 5, but then, cars,
planes, boats, trains. Underneath that, electricity, which is coal, natural gas, industry, buildings, agriculture. I want everybody to have that pie chart in their head, and the theory of change, which is that we need to make all those things without them costing more. I always say there's two numbers, 50 billion and zero. Zero is what we want emissions to be, and zero is what we want the extra cost of green cement, green beef, green rice, green car. We want it even at the low end where you park on the street, because even if the world should pay a lot for green things, they won't, because it's a global problem. The real problem is for future generations. The negative impacts have been somewhat overstated for the current generation, actually, but because it accumulates and gets worse over time, if it causes us to help those future generations, that it's not a terrible thing. The damage is mostly in poor countries. It's almost like people didn't realize weather's always been a problem, and they're like, oh, every bad weather thing, that's climate. No, there was bad weather before, and it's slightly getting worse, but it's near the equator where your absolute temperatures defeat outdoor work and the current crops that we have. That's where you're getting into conditions that humans have never thrived in.
Well, on the electricity side, and we'll get to nuclear in a minute because you and I share a passion in that being a great source. And there's all kinds of things. One, the need for electricity. Second, you have good, scalable, clean, cost-effective power. You can solve all kinds of ills. What are the other energy sources of renewables and green energy that are capturing your attention outside of nuclear?
Well, of course, we want to keep driving solar to be cheaper. That's gone way better than was expected. And there's some new things using perovskites that'll drive the efficiency up of that. We want to drive wind costs down, including offshore wind, which is still quite a bit at a premium. We want to improve energy storage, but it's not realistic to think we'll completely solve that problem, which is why you need nuclear in the mix as well.